Welcome to Not Your Typical Leadership Coaching, the podcast that builds on conventional wisdom and adds a fresh perspective on this ever-evolving field of coaching.
Are you fed up with advice that doesn't really get to the heart of the matter or really get you?
Whether you're a reluctant or seasoned leader, this podcast is for you.
Embark on a journey of actionable insights, harness untapped potential, and learn to develop a mindset that will transform you permanently.
Not Your Typical Leadership Coaching, where we shatter boundaries and awaken the confident and compassionate leader within.
Well, hello again, Marty. Dr. Martin Kettlehead, PhD.
Hi, Bill.
Oh, here we go again, another episode of Not Your Typical Leadership Coaching Podcast. And today we're going to talk about adult children. And maybe we should start by talking about why are we talking about adult children and what does that have to do with leadership? My initial thoughts about that are, first of all, when we talk about adult children, what we're referring to is adults, obviously, who, when they were children, grew up in the way I refer to it as in dysfunctional environments. There is a 12-step program that's been around since the late 70s, early 80s, that's based on the original 12-step programs, adult children of alcoholics, and then later on they changed it to adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. And there's a big history there that anybody that's interested can learn about, but that's not what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the laundry list.
Before you do, I think it's helpful. Why the term adult children, what that's referring to is those conversations, those behaviors that got stuck when we were children. And now here we are as adults still acting and thinking from those same patterns that were established as a child. There are areas in which we haven't grown. And so we're adults acting from childhood traumas.
Right. Strategies that we formed in childhood to be able to cope with and survive our dysfunctional environments.
Right.
I believe that the 12-step group got its name, though, because a group of Alateens aged out and they weren't ready to be done with the community that they had formed to support each other. An Alateen is somebody that's a teenager of in a family where there's an alcoholic present. And usually, so there was AA, there still is, Alcoholics Anonymous, then there's Al-Anon, people that love alcoholics, and then teenagers that are in families where there's an alcoholic, whether they're still drinking or still alive or sober or not. So children of alcoholics were in Alateen. Now adult children, there wasn't a program for that, so they created and called it adult children. But as you say, and it makes perfectly good sense still that we would refer to them as adult children because they're adults, but responding from strategies formed in childhood.
There's so much to say about this. I would think that to a certain extent, IFS would have to acknowledge we're all adult children.
Yeah, exactly. No doubt about it, which is why internal family systems is really taken off in the 12-step recovery meetings, especially ACA or ACOA, it's also referred to as. Sometimes in Codependence Anonymous too.
I got a little taste for this last comment on adult children in a transformational program I did many years ago where we created an autobiography. And so there was a page for each year of your life. And there were certain things you wanted to capture, like a picture of yourself from that year, things that you knew you were saying at that time, et cetera. Major events, and you started to see like how certain things I do now, like they started when I was 5, like that's a 5-year-old conversation, right? So you can date the child like parts of you. You can date them like, yeah, that reaction that I have to authority, that's a 3-year-old conversation, right? So in that sense, we can see and explain that we are adults living as children.
Which takes us right to the laundry list. In the early years when they were trying to say, okay, so who are we now? We're no longer teenagers, and most of us aren't even living at home anymore. We're adults living our adult lives and noticing that we have some problems. We're having some problems adulting. And they found that they had a lot of things in common. So they began to capture what are the common things that we're talking about, that struggles that we have in life as adults, having been raised in alcoholic families. And we're not talking, again, I just want to point out that we're not talking just about alcoholic families where there's dysfunction for any reason.
Right.
And to some degree, like you pointed out with IFS, we all did to some degree grow up in dysfunctional environments simply because we lived in the societies that we live in at the time that we live. There's a whole lot of dysfunction going on.
Well, and I think just by way of information, the second most common cause of dysfunction families besides alcoholism is mental illness.
Is that right? I didn't know that. Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense.
Nobody knows what to do with it. And so dysfunction arises.
Well, and mental illness, and then there's physical illness. When there's chronic illness in a family, that creates a ton of dysfunction, or where members of the family don't feel like they even have a right to have feelings and be for their friends who have freedom and don't have to take care of, let's say, a sick parent, or live in families where there's one child who needs special care because they're a
Right.
special person, and the child that doesn't need that special care now feels left out and feels guilty about wanting more attention than they're getting, and feels put upon or resentful because they're expected to take care of the special needs child who they secretly resent. As you say, there's a lot of dysfunction that goes on. And maybe it circles right back around to mental illness, which includes, I would say, addiction and adaptation for trauma, and probably for a response to this kind of dysfunction that we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
Which is also a lot of mental illness. I understand that there's a lot of mental illness that is physiological at its core, expert in that area by any means. But there's also some crossover and mix of adaptation. I thought we could take a look at some of these. Now, what does this have to do with leadership? This is not your typical leadership coaching. This is a very atypical conversation if you're talking about leadership. I wonder if we can tie these together. Why is it important that we acknowledge and recognize that many of us are walking around as adults, but responding to life as if we're children? What does that have to do with leadership? What are your first thoughts about that?
Well, my first thought about it is that leadership is a kind of relationship. It's one in which we get empowered. Just to put it in the simplest way I can think of, it could be like the Christ child is born in Bethlehem and we're all empowered, like that a child will lead them, right? That's an example, the relationship that we have to the baby Jesus. Or it could be on a soccer team that somebody sees that the defense is weak down in the left-hand end of the field, and so shoots the ball down there. As a leader, gets the ball into that area. If the person who's in a position to lead, or the people in position to lead, are caught up in these childhood conversations, then they're not going to see the way forward. They're going to be stuck in resolving these personal issues and not focused on the group's future.
Well said. I often will say, caught up in solving problems that no longer even exist.
Yeah.
Because they're from the past. I always am oriented to the internal family systems, of course, and one of the terms that we use in IFS is self-leadership. And so what this laundry list and what the adaptations from dysfunctional environments, growing up in dysfunctional environments, has to do for me with leadership is that the best leaders, I believe, are the ones who have developed the ability to lead themselves from the inside out, and then therefore have the acuity and the capacity to be able to lead others from that same source of resourceful wisdom, from all of those resources that are only available to us when we can tap into who we truly are, our true authentic self, rather than those adaptive children or those parts of ourselves that are still burdened and incomplete with the past, which is why IFS can be so powerful for leadership coaching. So I thought we could take a look at some of these. I'm looking over here to my left at my split screen, and I'm looking on the ACA website, adultchildren.org. Under literature, there's a link for the laundry list, 14 traits of an adult child it says of an alcoholic. Again, it goes on to say, and dysfunctional families. So number one is we became isolated and afraid of people and authority figures. This is what early on, they all agreed. Yeah, those of us that are in this ACA program, Adult Children of Alcoholics, have this in common. It's most of us are isolated. We have a tendency to isolate, and we do so because we're afraid of people and we're afraid of authority figures. And when it comes to leadership, if that's still alive in someone, how in the world could they possibly lead? It'd be too risky.
I could tell a quick story. This is like 10 years ago. I was working with a business partner to fill a group coaching program or a series of them. And we hired a woman to basically do the marketing for these programs and to kind of manage us. So we could focus on the content, the curriculum, being with the clients. And this woman that we hired to do the marketing, she was very authoritative, right? She knew her stuff. She had all this experience. She was very self-confident and everything. And I got intimidated. I got concerned. Actually, it wasn't when I sat her down to tell her about this so that I could complete it in front of her and not carry it into our future together. And when I did, as I was talking, I realized, I'm actually afraid of you, that like other people that have in my childhood who were the authority figures, that you're going to let me down.
Yeah.
That you're not going to see what I need. You're not going to hear me, and you're going to do random things that not having listened to my needs. Right. And so she was like, wow, that's really interesting.
Right.
But just to, that gave us the ability that then she was able to share her vulnerability. She was actually whipping up the authoritativeness because she was intimidated by us coaches.
I see. Right. She's trying to level the playing field by bringing her area of expertise.
So we were both being children. She's being in her 5-year-old competitiveness, and I'm in my 2-year-old fear of dad. Mm-hmm. So we were able to talk it out, and we realized like we really just need to get to know each other better. You're off there in your marketing silo. I'm off here in my coaching silo. That was a bad assumption. Mm-hmm. So we came together and learned more about each other, and we went on to work successfully together.
You acknowledged recently I wrote an article and included a list of 7 steps to take to repair relationship rupture. So in your story, I hear that you implemented and used a lot of those steps that I identified. And one of them is acknowledge that there's a problem. Acknowledge there's a rupture here. There's something going on. There's a problem in this relationship. Mm-hmm. The second one is to tell the truth about what you're experiencing. Maybe not the second one, but one of the things that I just heard you say is you told the truth about what you were experiencing. And when you did that, in order to do that, you had to be vulnerable. You had to tell the truth to someone who intimidated you. Took a lot of courage to do that.
Yeah.
And when you did that, it invited her to respond in kind. One of the things that we say in IFS is that self, our true authentic self with all the resources, responds and reacts to self in another person. If you show up authentically and openly with me, I feel safe to do the same thing with you. However, if I were to come at you with defensive-ness or blame or some sort of adaptive survival strategy, I'm going to invite those parts of you to respond in like kind.
Sure, exactly, yeah. And so just to get back to the leadership piece, she wasn't leading, she was showing off. I wasn't leading, I was scared to death. Yeah. There was no leadership between the two of us. There was no leadership going on. We were just like spinning in our little worlds. It wasn't until after we cleared all of this out that we could get on the same page and work for the same goal.
That's a beautiful story. Great example both of the problem with not addressing this characteristic that is common to adult children, and then how to address it. Both showed up in your example. That's perfect. We've got time for maybe 1 or 2 more of these 14, and I just recommend that this is interesting to the listener of this podcast, that you go to adultchildren.org, look under literature and find this laundry list and go through it and maybe do a self-test on it. And so let's just go to the second one here and see what comes up. We became approval seekers and lost our identity in the process. I love that. I love that because it is so true. The adaptive survival strategy of getting your approval in whatever way that I possibly can.
And how is it that you lose your identity in the process?
I can tell a story. The first thing that pops into my mind, it's not a well thought out story, but I can recollect being, playing this out in my life. I was 19 years old and I had just graduated from high school, was in the grocery business, having decided not to go to college because my girlfriend lived in the town where I lived, and I was going to have to live in a different town if I was going to go to college. even though I had been accepted and was going to go, I fell in love. So I stayed and went full time in the grocery business and was hanging out with a bunch of guys that were 2, 3, 4 years older than I was. All of these guys had dramatically different lifestyles, values than I did.
Mm-hmm.
But because I was around them for those 40 hours a week, plus then we started going out to the bars. In Montana at that time, the drinking age was 18. So I was able at 19 years old to go out to the bar, shoot pool, dance, drink, do all the things that they were doing. I pretty much became a part of their culture. So my beliefs changed, my attitudes toward others, toward women, towards gender, all of it changed according to their belief system because I wanted to be included. And so I noticed that when I began to talk the way they talked, do the things that they did, enjoy the things that they enjoyed, water skiing was one of them. I was scared to death of the water. I was scared to death that I would drown, so I never went into the water, but they water skied. So I became a water skier to get their approval. And yes, I absolutely lost my identity in the process. Not that I had it before. I think I'd already lost it before I met these guys, but I didn't know who I was. And this is when it really brought it to my attention. I have 5 sisters, 3 still surviving, but one of them said to me one day, "You are just like Tom." What do you mean I'm just like Tom? I was offended by that, of course. The offense or the defense that I experienced, now I understand to be, oh no, I'm giving away my secret. She's actually able to see right through my act here. And I said, what do you mean? She said, you laugh exactly like him. And I knew immediately that she was right. I felt caught.
Well, I can also see if what person is up to is seeking approval of others, by nature, they're following. There's no leadership in that. That's a following action, not a leading action.
You got to admit, there's a lot of leaders out there that are leading with maybe it's a hidden agenda of getting approval.
Totally.
Of the board of directors, of the stockholders, of their supervisor, of whoever they're answering to.
Sure. I mean, we've seen this with the Speaker of the House getting caught up in trying to please all these different factions and then losing the job because he doesn't have the votes. But and I stand by what I said. That's not leadership. It's following. It's followership instead.
Yeah. So it's the popular opinion that leads in that case.
Yeah.
Not the principles, not the values, not the
precisely,
not the overall objective of whatever leadership position is responsible to accomplish.
Right.
Well, that's about all we have time for. We started a little late today. We both have cutoff times here. This is going to be a fairly short episode, but I hope that I've enjoyed it. And I think that we could probably go a couple more hours if we had the time just to go through this laundry list. I don't know. We always say this. Maybe we'll pick it up again later, but I doubt it. But I just want to encourage the reader to go check out. And if you notice that you are an adult who's struggling a bit with adulting, of course, I would enjoy having a conversation with you, but know that there is a 12-step program that is organized around helping people like you and me to recover from living our lives as the adaptive children, as Terry Real, the author of the book Us, would say. We live our lives as the adaptive children that we used to be, rather than the authentic, wise adults that we are.
Beautiful. I hesitate to say anything more after that.
As always, Marty, enjoyed our conversation, and until next time.
Take care.
That concludes another episode of Not Your Typical Leadership Coaching. We hope you found inspiration and valuable insights to fuel your leadership journey.
Remember, true leadership is not about you. It's about empowering others.
Take your insights to heart and cultivate a leadership mindset that will transform you from within.
Thank you for joining us on this quest to leadership excellence. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where we delve deeper into the art of leadership.
Until next time, remember that you have the power to lead with confidence and compassion from the inside out.